So the Senate is writing new gun legislation, and it's supposedly a quote-unquote bipartisan bill. The Republicans who are voting for this bill are the usual suspects. Lindsey Graham, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, the typical, what they like to call rhinos. Republicans in name only. That's the Republican Party. I got news for you. Nixonians, Romneyites, people who are not hard and fast conservatives, but they're Republican. That's what a rhino really means, okay? Conservative principle is the Second Amendment, means what it says. They have no right to control personal armaments in the United States of America at the federal level. Now, states can do individual things. Well, you can't have it in this community. A business owner can bar you from using a gun inside the business, but you can keep it in your home or whatever. We do that all the time. And that's what Scalia meant when he said, well, it's not absolute. No, it's not in that sense. But insofar as government, insofar as the federal government, it's not up for negotiation. Well, anyway, Lauren Boebert, and Marjorie Taylor Greene both tweeted out, these are the 18 Republicans that are shutting down. Well, it's a typical argument, right? Yeah, they're not holding to the conservative principles and Christian conservative principles. Politicians, right? So I simply send out a tweet, which I knew would be inflammatory because liberals get all upset when you talk about this. I said, Constable, let me read the original tweet, okay? Because it's really important I get it right. I said, in one thread, I said the sentence, and in another thread, I said, as in another thread. So it said, constitutional rights should not be up for a vote in Congress at all. To do so presupposes those rights come from government and not natural born. In other words, if you write legislation at the congressional level, you're saying that you have the right, Congress has the right to determine the means at which we have constitutional rights. I said, that's wrong. Rights, constitutional, the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech, the rights of personal firearms, the right to a speedy trial, trial by jury, etc., on down the list, right of privacy, etc. These are all freedoms that we enjoy inherent in being an American. It's natural born. Now, some people have interpreted God-given. I don't like using that term because the framers of our Constitution didn't use it. They believed, as I do, that there are certain rights that are enjoyed by anyone who is a resident of America. Right to freedom of speech, Second Amendment, even illegal aliens are entitled to trial by jury, etc. We believe that as a people. As such, we ratified it or codified it in our founding document. We said this is very important, that government can't take these rights that you have. That's why they refer to rights as inalienable. That government can't interfere with your exercise of these rights, these natural born rights. In other words, you have it already. No one can take that away from you. Certain localities, that's not spelled out. The 10th Amendment would apply. Anything not specifically mentioned in this Constitution is reserved to the right of the states or the people. Right? Everyone went wild. No, you can't do that. No, God's not God-given. God didn't say you could have. Jesus didn't say you could have a gun. You should see the thread. It's pages long. Everybody's sitting around screaming at each other. Your rights are natural born. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You have the right to a personal firearm. It's been ratified in our Constitution. It's been upheld by the Supreme Court a number of times. And the meaning of the Second Amendment is clear if you read the papers and letters between the framers at the time of the ratification of the Constitution, including the speeches on the day it was ratified about it. They actually said things about it. Well-regulated. That's one that came up a lot. Oh, it's well-regulated. Well-regulated. Well, you can understand. 1787, well-regulated meant an orderly fashion. In other words, in order for a society to operate properly, its people need to be armed. And its people are defined as the militia. There was no National Guard at the time. And it's one of the reasons, that definition, which was reinforced in the 14th Amendment, another reference to natural born. The reason that has been interpreted that way is because the framers said it at the time, that the rights of the militia are an orderly people. And more importantly, it's one of the reasons why every state in the Union makes state militias. In other words, independent. In other words, a bunch of private people putting on uniforms and carrying a gun. It's illegal because it's separate from the people. The people as a whole, in other words, residents and citizens of the United States, enjoy the right of ownership of personal firearms. That means handguns, pistols, rifles, etc. At the time, there's some argument as whether you can make it insofar as heavier weapons, such as artillery or cannon. But I think our Constitution and our interpretation is open to that, okay? But personal firearms is sacrosanct. So now you've got people up on the Hill who think, oh, we'll just restrict it because, oh, he's a crazy person. Oh, he's not somebody who should have a gun. And listen, I don't want someone who's mentally ill wandering around shooting people either. But there were very specific quotes, and I want to read them to you because these kind of quotes are really important into understanding what went through the minds of, let me pull them up here. I want to make sure this is really important because it's very important that you understand what the framers felt about the Second Amendment and its meaning. And I'm going to read from the Massachusetts Ratifying Convention in 1788. Samuel Adams, the Constitution shall never be construed to prevent the people of the United States who are peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms. That's pretty definitive. Then on another statement, the Virginia Ratifying Convention, June 4th, 1788. George Mason, I ask, who are the militia? They consist now of the whole people, except a few public officers. So they're very clear. Thomas Jefferson, in his letter to John Cartwright in June 5th of 1824, the Constitution of most states and of that of the United States assert that all power is inherent in the people, not government. And they did make that distinction, that they may exercise it by themselves. That is their right and duty to be at all times armed. And they just don't understand. People, the lack of education on people about our constitutional rights, I think, is deliberate. They don't want you knowing your rights. George Carlin used to make a great joke about it. He said, the reason they don't teach you your rights is because if you knew your rights, you wouldn't allow all this shit to go on. Thomas Jefferson, in a letter to William Stephen Smith, who's the son-in-law of John Adams, what country can preserve its liberties? Because they often say that they make this argument about the Second Amendment. Says, well, it was never intended to overthrow a government. That's not what they meant. Oh, it isn't, huh? Thomas Jefferson said in this letter, what country can preserve its liberties if their rulers are not warned from time to time that their people preserve the spirit of resistance? Let them take arms. It's very clear, and if you go through the Federalist Papers and the discussion about the Second Amendment, when there are a number of them, I'll leave that to you to do your own research, that they intended for the American people to be armed and ready to fight at any moment. That cannot be authorized by government. Because if you make a red flag law, regardless of the cause, regardless of whether you think that a mentally ill person, I don't want it either, but there's another important quote. Let me pull this one up. So let me read this here because it deals functionally with mentally ill people or people who would misuse their weapon to hurt others. As civil rulers, not having their duty to the people before them may attempt to tyrannize, and as military forces, which must be occasionally used, raised to defend our country. Remember, the framers never intended for us to have a standing army. That's why it says this. Might pervert their power to the injury of their fellow citizens. The people are conformed by the article in their right to keep and bear their private arms. In other words, look, there are going to be times that government will act hostilely. There are going to be times when there are people that will use the Second Amendment to hurt others. But it doesn't matter because the damage and danger of the restriction of the Second Amendment is essential to the preservation of liberty. I wish some of these senators would really read these things. I don't think they do. They're elected officials. All they are concerned about is getting elected next year. And that's why they're voting this way. They seem to think that the American people want some sort of gun legislation because the American people don't know what they're talking about. They have no true understanding of the purpose of the Second Amendment, the deterrent effect, which is the real intent when you understand what the framers of our Constitution wrote and what they felt about it. And some people have actually brought up the abortion debate. Well, then that means that abortion can... I said, no. An interpreted right, which is what abortion is, Roe versus Wade, is an interpretation of the 14th Amendment. It is not spelled out in the Constitution, and it is the very reason why I am for a repeal of Roe versus Wade. It has nothing to do with my personal feelings on abortion. It has everything to do with its bad legislation. There is nothing specific about abortion in our Constitution. Nothing. And therefore, the 10th Amendment takes place. Anything not mentioned in this Constitution is reserved to the people or the states. State, if it wants to have abortion up to the moment of birth, it can. Or it can regulate it and outlaw it completely. It's up to individual states and individual communities. That's what the framers intended. And the further we go away from what the framers intended, the worse this country off has been. We have walked away from the right of the states to